Welcome to another edition of the Giants Top 100 Players presented by Bud Light. I'm Bob Pappas. The Giants celebrate 100 years of New York Giants football, and one of the really cool things is the countdown in the top 100. And we're going to look at 31 through 40, joined by Paul Schwartz, who is part of the process. What we did was we took 13 independent voters, historians, Hall of Fame voters, people from the National Football League, put together a blue ribbon panel. And Paul, of over the 5,000 men who have worn a Giants uniform since 1925, we got a list of 100. Talk about that process and what it was like for you revisiting these names and really not just to study in Giants history, but NFL history.
Well, I would like to say it was impossible, but we did come up with a list of 100, so it was not impossible, it was possible. But it's very difficult. I mean, we have two obviously great former Giants here, two of many that we had to look from. And first you had to figure out, are they deserving of the top 100? And then where do you put them in the top 100? There was debate, certainly. I mean, there was, maybe a little person from this era saying, I think this era should be represented more than this era. Very difficult, obviously, two very deserving guys here. But it was great. I mean, you learn a lot. You learn a lot from other voters and just pouring through history and seeing, there's a lot of really good players you had to sort through, really.
Well, we have number 31 on our list, Chris Snee, and Joe Morris was number 38. And Joe, I'll defer to you as the veteran of the group here. Your reaction to being named one of the top 100 players in the history of the franchise?
When you told me, I almost wanted to cry. I was that moved. My career started here very strangely for me, and I thought when I got here, I was going to be here for maybe a year and I'll be someplace else. And it all turned around, and it took 2.5 years, but I'm very proud of this honor. I'm thankful for it. I had great teammates. I played with some of the greats. And I'm in awe of this whole experience.
Joe was part of the Super Bowl 21-25 era, that great time in Giants history, 84 through 1990. Chris, you under Tom Coughlin sort of replicated what Parcells did, having won Super Bowls in 07 and 11. For you, what's it like to be recognized as one of the top 100 players in the history of the franchise, and like Joe being Super Bowl champion?
Well, like Joe said, extremely humbling. Actually, when you spoke to me, I had chills throughout my whole body, and it was a similar phone call to when Mr. Mara called and said I would go into the Ring of Honor. And then to put it in perspective, to think about when you said 5,000 players that have worn the uniform and to be ranked where I was, it's extremely flattering, and my thought after you told me was going to my teammates who I played with, and how nothing would have happened without the four guys I played with up front, and to be on this list with them is very special and means a lot.
Joe, you mentioned that you thought you might only last 2 years or whatever. You wind up not only setting the Giants' single-season rushing record, but when you left the Giants, you were the Giants' all-time leading rusher. Who inspired you? Who helped guide you to bring out the best in Joe Morris to become a champion and become one of the greatest Giants of all time?
I guess that three people did. I have a teammate, Harry Carson. I watched him do things. I remember a game against Dallas. He was on one knee making tackles all game long. And after watching that, Bob, if you're not inspired by somebody going out there playing on one knee, because that's what Harry did. Then I had Maurice Carthon, someone who came in to block and do things for me. He told me, he said, Joe, we're not going to get them blocked all the time. Sometimes you have to break tackle somebody, you have to do this. And you're going to have to do this by yourself. He said, Joe, you're going to have to stand up to it. He says, the last thing I want you to remember is this right here, Joe. I'm going to get my block. I don't care what everybody else does. You do your job and get us to the end zone. Do what you got to do. And I guess the last person I really want to mention is Mark Haynes. When he was a player here, he told me, he said, Joe, this is a business. You have to understand that. But I want you to understand this. You have ability. Let no one tell you what you're capable of doing. If you believe in yourself, it's going to be fine. And you think about Harry and Mark and what they told me, and then Maurice being a teammate and playing with me in the same backfield. Those three people really helped me. I had George Martin, I had Phil Simms around me, I had Mark Bavaro, people that I enjoyed being around. But those three were the people that got me to think about trying to do something special here.
Here we go. 1 yard needed for a touchdown. Handoff. Morris is going to get it.
Also, I mean, with both of these guys, I mean, big games and big moments. You know, we have Super Bowl champions here, and to look at some of your numbers in '85, which was the start of that. You know, I mean, or the, you know, the precipice of a championship, and then to see '86 and the numbers you put up. You know, people have to remember that this is 100 years. It's a long era. When Joe played, the Giants ran the ball more than they threw the ball, right? That just doesn't happen now. So the running back, the number one running back then, was more important. He really was. If you couldn't run the ball, you couldn't win. 21 touchdowns in '85, 14 in '86, all those yards in the playoffs. I mean, that's how you get to be in the top 100, because you not only do it, you do it in the biggest stage at the biggest moments. I mean, you can't write the history of the '86 Super Bowl winning Giants without, you know, a pretty good chapter on the running game led by Joe and the offensive line and everything else. But it was a running game back then, more so than it is now, and he was the ringleader of it.
I think the beauty of it, too, is although it's two different eras, Chris, I mean, you could talk to this. You didn't have Joe Morris. You had more of a compilation. But you guys had the same mindset that they had. Everybody knew that when the Giants needed to make a yard or they needed to run a game out, it was Joe Morris running off the right side or whatever. I dare you to stop it. Your '07 Giants and the '08 Giants pretty much were the same thing.
Yeah.
You guys won with a run game.
We did, and that's how they, like, you know, the front office constructed the offensive line. That's, you know, we knew that era was so successful, so why not go back and try to tap into that well and kind of construct a similar team? So the offensive line we had was a running offensive line, you know, who could pass block with the help of a good running game. So we had tremendous running backs, starting from when I first came here in '04 with Tiki, and then, you know, the heads that came after it, Brandon, Derek Ward, Ahmad Bradshaw, you know, tough, physical, downhill guys, obviously different styles, but still physical running backs. So it was something that we took tremendous pride in doing, is running the ball when they knew we were going to run it.
With Chris and his offensive line, the first one in 2007, you were the highest drafted player on that line. You know, there was no first-round picks on that line. You know, O'Hara was undrafted. Richie Seubert was undrafted. Kareem McKenzie was a third-round pick of the Jets, right? And David Deal was a fifth-round pick. So it was interesting. You were the most decorated. I remember the night that you were drafted. Somebody else was drafted that day, right? Who else was drafted that same day? Oh, Eli, right? Eli was drafted. So I remember the Chargers draft Eli Manning, and I'm working and trying to get this all done. And then he gets traded to the Giants, and holy cow. And before you know it, the Giants are on the clock with the second-round pick. And I remember just hearing, okay, they got Chris Snee, guard, Boston College. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Just a guard, right? Now he's in the top 100, and you and Eli. And, oh, by the way, you mentioned Tiki being a good running back. He had his 3 best years of his career, 4, 5, and 6. When you guys, and you blocking for him especially, he had career high to finish off his career. So, I mean, you know. And then 4 years later, you did it with David Boss, right? He was the center, and you had Booth. So still no first-round pick. So in your sort of quiet, understated way, you were the top guy for both lines, you know, both of those Super Bowl lines, because you were the highest drafted guy, and that's the way you did it. You did it in your own way, but you were the leader of that group, I can tell you that.
Joe, you helped deliver the first championship for the Giants in 30 years. There was so much downtime between the NFL championship loss in 1963 until the Giants finally made the playoffs again in '81. So you usher in this new era, and you're part of the renaissance of the Giants. With someone living in the area like you did, was it fun to watch his teams sort of have some of the same DNA that your teams had?
You know, what was really great about those teams are this right here. These guys went to work every week, just like we did. They could run the ball down people's throats. Same thing I was used to doing against them. I had such respect for what they did. You know, Tom Coughlin is somebody that I love too. This was my college coach. He was my position coach. This is someone I was proud of, and he was doing this. But then you had the situation where these guys, they made plays when they had to. Anytime in the running game, they could do it, and they could pass the ball. They could do anything they wanted to do, just like Field did for us. He could make plays when we gave him a chance to.
Yeah, make plays at the right time. Bobby Johnson, 4th and 17, right?
Exactly.
Bobby, be alert. You might be open. Hits him with it. Chris, I want to ask you about number 32 on the list, Osi Umenyiora, your teammate. Guy that you had to practice against every day and go against. What made Osi such a difference maker in your opinion?
He was just so athletic. You know, when I first got here as a rookie, you're looking through the defensive lineman. Obviously, Strahan is the guy, and you're like, how do I fare up against him? But quickly in practice, you can just see I had never seen an athlete like Osi before on the edge.
Guilford back to throw, sacked by Umenyiora. Ball is loose, picked up by Osi. He's running with it. He's got roadblocks to midfield. No one's going to catch Umenyiora. He's got speed. 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown, Osi Umenyiora. He gets the hat trick, the sack, the forced fumble, and the touchdown, 75 yards.
You know, elite first step, really good with his hands, and he had surprising power. That was the one thing I don't think he got credit for, is he could hold up against the run. He could convert, a speed rush into a power rush and knock a guy back. So that part of his game was understated. And I just think what I loved about Osi so much was that he just was always in a good mood. He was always, like that infectious smile, that guy you want in the locker room. That it just kind of rubbed off on everyone else in the right way. He was a leader of the team. He came to work, and obviously when he was in uniform, he was very, very productive. Just a guy you want to be around, an infectious personality, and a guy that just had a passion for football and loved wearing the Giants uniform.
I think Osi also took a lot of pride in recording sacks and forced fumbles without actually ever hitting the ground. Because he was so fast coming off the edge, knocked that ball. He didn't even get dirty.
I think his teammates used to say that he didn't even need to wash his uniform. Clean, looked like he wasn't doing anything. You look at this thing. He's got 1.5 sacks. He's got a forced fumble. Was anyone quicker off the line?
Not that I can remember.
Now, did you see that in training camp, like that off the line?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And listen, like when we came to practice, we worked. As he, go against the same guys for 3-4 years. Sure, there's some brother-in-law treatment. You maybe, kind of just work hands in a pass set. But training camp was training camp now. We were all getting ready for the season, so we saw what Osi had to bring, and he was, like I said, very.
And he liked. In practice, he beat you. He told you he beat you.
He definitely did. He did. But he did it with a smile on his face. Not a face that you wanted to punch.
But you weren't smiling when he said that, I'm sure, right?
Well, he didn't really slide inside.
Of course not.
Joe, I want to ask you about some other names on this list in this grouping that you're in, because you've, again, being in the area, you've seen a lot of these guys working for the league on the sideline, making sure that the socks were of the right length and everything else. But the talent and the precision of number 37 on this list, Odell Beckham Jr., and his ability to control a football game from the wide receiver position was pretty amazing.
One of the plays I think about every time I think about football, the day he made that one-handed catch in the end zone. That was a play that you just don't see made.
Deep ball down the right sideline. It's a jump ball. Odell Beckham Jr. made the catch with one hand for the touchdown. Wow, what a catch by the rookie.
Wow, ridiculous.
He did it with one hand. He brought the ball down with control. That impressed me. That play showed what he was capable of doing. And that's Giant football there. You make plays when you have a chance.
Deep ball down the right sideline. He's got Odell on the run across the 40. He's to the 30, 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown Giants, 75 yards.
Boy, that one looked like pitch and catch there.
Remember the one game up, and I don't know if you were on the sidelines for it, but the Ravens, good team, and they decided to play cover zero, and Eli throws them the slant, and it was just...
It was over.
It was over. Yeah.
It was over.
Now it comes down to 4th and 1. Back to throw. Zips it over the middle. Caught by Odell. He's racing across midfield. He's to the 40. Breaks left to the 30. He's to the 20. 15, 10, 5. Touchdown Giants. 66 yards. Oh, baby, is he good. The Giants win in a wild one.
It looked like a video game because there was a guy here, a guy here, a guy here, and you saw Odell, and I said, okay.
One of the guys was Ed Reed, by the way, who's in the Hall of Fame.
He's going to get him, not close. He's going to get him, not close. And look, that was a lot of the offense back then, right? It was hope, bang. Hope Odell makes a play. He made it very often.
Another guy that kind of fell, well, a guy that really fell in between your two eras, but was a great player, is number 34 on the list, Jesse Armstead. Jesse came to the Giants as a late-round pick, an 8th-round pick in '93. It's not even 8 rounds in the draft anymore, but because of a knee injury, he would have gone higher. But I always got the sense, and maybe you could share this with us a little bit, that Jesse would have fit in the mindset and temperament of your teams as well as your teams.
Mm-hmm. Jesse would have fit right in. He is just the same motor, same abilities, and same just going after people as Harry Carson. Those are people. When I put you in a cast with Harry Carson, you have to be someone special. And trust me, Jesse had that. And he knew it. He was nasty. He went out and he made people pay when he was playing. That's what he wanted to do. And, nicest guy in the world, fun guy, but he did his job every Sunday.
There's no better place to watch live TV this fall than Hulu Plus Live TV. Why? Because you get your favorite sports like football, local channels, shows, and so much more. Plus, get Hulu's entire streaming library with Disney Plus and ESPN Plus included with your plan. No long-term contracts or hidden fees. Don't wait. Start your 3-day free trial of Hulu Plus Live TV today. Live TV plan required. Access content from each service separately. Offer valid for new and eligible returning subscribers only if available. Terms and restrictions apply. Learn more at hulu.com.
He was soft-spoken in the locker room, but I remember once talking to him, and he also had he had a really gentle handshake. So you say, this is the fierce guy you see on the field? And I remember talking to him once and about the field and playing, and he looked at me and he had like a scowl, and he said, when I'm on that field, it's my time to hunt. And he just said it in a very mean way. And I'm like, look, I think this interview is probably over. You know what I mean? I think he's kind of getting in that hunt mode. I mean, you're right. I mean, they don't even have a round anymore that he was drafted. And he had a list of every linebacker who was taken before him that draft. There were like 40-something linebackers. And every time one of those guys was out of the league, he would cross it off. Like, okay, you thought he was better than me? X, X, X. And he was better than all of them.
Antonio Pierce had the same list,
by
the way, and he was undrafted.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the first time I met Jesse, I was in the weight room. And, I was a guy that took pride in being strong. And, so me, O'Hara, and I think Luke Pettigo had, like 405, and we're kind of just throwing some reps in. And Jesse comes walking in, didn't even warm up, and he hops on the bench, and he just,
really?
And I'm thinking, and I was like, who is this guy? And then I kind of got and then I was like, oh, I know Jesse Armstead. And I got the backstory, but I think to this day, probably a guy that you don't want to get in a fight with. That kind of mentality.
Paul, Benny Friedman is number 36 on this list. 2-time All-American quarterback at Michigan. This is how good a player he was in his era. Giants owner Tim Mara bought a fledgling Detroit franchise because Friedman was playing for Detroit, and he bought the team just to make sure that he had Benny Friedman as his quarterback for the Giants.
It's a business, right? And the business was getting a quarterback who could sell tickets. And he was a great player, obviously. You don't see a lot of footage of him, but when you researched him, you said there's got to be a place for him in the top 100 because he was a seminal quarterback at an era of Giants football.
Yeah, and I mean, one year he led the league in rushing and passing touchdowns. I mean, it was a different game at that point in time, but he was a player that helped change the game in the sense of the forward pass was not as common, and Benny Friedman was one of the 2 players in the league that perfected the forward pass and kind of changed a little bit of the arc of the National Football League.
I wonder if the quarterbacks who play today, if you would say his name, most of them probably wouldn't know. But if you say to them, there's a couple of guys who played way before you that if not for them, you might not be throwing 40 touchdown passes. So guys like, Benny Friedman, we can win throwing the ball, let's do it more often.
George Halas said Benny Friedman was the first quarterback to help us all understand in the game the potential of what the forward pass could bring to the game. Now for you two guys, let's keep it on the ground, keep it simple.
Exactly.
There's so many other great names on this list. Fran Tarkington, someone that we kind of grew up watching. Although his notoriety, a lot of it came with the Minnesota Vikings, what he did with the Giants, going to a bunch of Pro Bowls, and in 1970 they had a chance to make the playoffs, but the guy was a magician on the field. Do you remember watching him as a kid at all?
Yeah, I did remember seeing him play, and I remember more from Minnesota. But when I got here, that's when I found out about it, because I'm someone that likes to know about the franchise I'm with. I want to find out this. And that was one of the good things about that, because to see him do that here as well as in Minnesota when I watched him as a kid.
How about Rosie Greer and what he was able to do?
Rosie Greer was an amazing man. I mean, he had an amazing life. He was friends with RFK, wasn't he? He was a film star. He was a great player with the Giants. I mean, I just, really don't remember him as a player. Watching him, it was a little before my time, but I've seen clips. Then he went to the Rams, and he was part of, what were they, the Fearsome Foursome, and just an incredible personality. I mean, and I think that was the way he was a football player too. He seemed like very gregarious on the field.
I think it kind of speaks to the panel that was assembled in the fact that Rosie Greer winds up finishing 35th on this list, because sometimes we become so recent biased. You think of Alex Webster.
Right half back and flank wide to the right goes Webster. Here's Versatility faking the king, throwing down the middle. Rhoda's in the open. He's got it, but he's shakes first one man, shakes first another. He's been chased from behind and brought down. There's a fumble on the play, and it's picked up by the York. And Willis is with the ball from the 20-yard line into the end zone. That's what happened.
39th on this list, who was as versatile a back as they had.
Old Pro Connerly airmails the message to Webster, who drives through Lauer, Cons, and Fisk for 25 yards to the Browns' 27. This time, the versatile Mr. Gifford blocks. Alex Webster carries the pigskin for the touchdown, and the Giants take the lead 7-0.
Number 40 on this list, the great Dick Lynch. As the radio analyst for a long time, and Joe, I know during your era, he used to go into that little players' lounge after the game and interview players right in the locker room, and he was such a fan of you guys and the football team, and so supportive.
And the best thing about Dennis was Dick was on your side. You knew it. He wanted to bring out the best in you. He wanted to bring out the best. He said to me, Joe, quit being so shy. Step up. Talk about the game as though we won the game. And that meant a lot to me. He said, Joe, I want you to be more confident. I know you're shy. Do your job. That's all I need you to do. And we're going to be fine. The radio interview is going to be fine. And Bob, that's the first time I ever thought about that. I go, you know what? I'm going to enjoy this and not worry so much about if I say something wrong. I really enjoy working with Dick. Just working with him, talking to him, and seeing places. It meant something to me because, trust me, Dick was a real fan. He said, you're going to be fine, young man. You're going to be fine. He always told me that. Always told me that.
And Chris, in his later years as a broadcaster, he always had the unlit cigar. But he was such a fan of you guys and Coach Coughlin, and it's got to be nice to have former players around that support you. And Dick was very supportive of you guys.
No doubt, yeah. Dick or anyone else that come back and kind of, just knowing that you have the backing of former coaches, players, it means a lot.
Dick Lynch, league-leading interceptor, nabs his third pass to stop another Eagle drive.
He's so big too. I remember, when you talk about all different eras, well, he was smaller, his this. I mean, how big was he? He was as a defensive back.
He was very tall.
Very tall. I mean, you say that was a guy who played so many years ago. They're usually supposed to be smaller.
So we're talking about my former broadcast partner, and he was with Jim Gordon and did those interviews, and then his last game actually that he did before he retired and then passed away was Super Bowl 42. But let's get into the nitty-gritty. In 1963, he led the NFL with 251 interception return yardage. He twice led the league in interceptions. He had 7 and 9 on 2 different occasions. He finished his Giants career with 35 interceptions. So we kind of think of Dick Lynch as the broadcaster, the character, but he played on all of those great Giants teams in the early 60s and was a heck of a player that put up some numbers that still stand today.
And the voting was not about, breadth of career as far as, it's not a broadcaster's wing. This is the top 100 players. So he was voted in as a player. I mean, the other stuff was great, but he was voted in just as a player. And as you said, he deserved it as a player. I mean, the other stuff is icing on the cake, and it's a great legacy of the man. But his voting in was not because, well, he was a great player and then he was a really popular announcer. No, great player. That's why he got in.
Yeah, I mean, he had 7 touchdowns in his career, which is pretty good for a defensive player, which is kind of like in one of the earlier shows that we did. You know, Tom Landry's name is on this list. He didn't make it for being a coach. He was a great defensive player for the New York Giants. So once a Giant, always a Giant, right? It's a Wellington Mara phrase. Joe, I want to ask you about Mr. Mara and the presence that you felt with him being so supportive of the team, but never getting in the way.
Funny thing for me with Mr. Mara was this right here. First thing he said to me, he says, "You know why I like you so much, young man? You're respectful. You understand. You came from a good family. I've met your mother. I've met your dad. They're wonderful people. You should reflect that every time you go out on the field because you're a New York Giant." So the second thing I want you to remember is this right here. They are proud of you. Don't embarrass them. And so the last thing I want you to do is remember, you're a New York Giant, and you make sure you play like you're a New York Giant every time you're on the field. Don't ever give anybody a chance. And you know, all he had to do was just look at me. It made me feel good about myself because he believed in me. And that meant something to me as a player.
And he was very supportive after every game, right?
Every
Win,
day.
lose, or draw.
He
Not
was there.
storming out to a private plane.
No.
In there with you guys.
Yep.
Chris, what about for you?
Well, for me, it's a little different. I mean, I've heard probably 30 people, have that same recollection. I mean, Mr. Mara passed away my second year here, so, but I do remember him bringing, especially that 2004 year, bringing his chair out, and he'd sit specifically near the offensive line. He was there, and he positioned himself to watch what we were doing. Obviously, at that time, it was kind of a position that had a bad reputation in the league, one of the worst in the league, as labeled. So, Pat Flaherty, our offensive line coach at the time, would always bring that to our attention. The eyes were always on us, and they were powerful eyes.
Joe, in your era, he did a lot of walking and walked around that practice field, but he always did have a soft spot for that offensive line play.
He liked the guys, and the thing about it was, he looked at Brad Benson, he looked at Carl Nelson, and he said to them, guys, you are the pillars of what we have. He says, you're my 2 guards. I got to work with these guys. These are the guys. You had Billy Yard, and you had Chris, and you knew they were there. And we got Bart, and he came in, and, we had Kevin in there before, but then with Bart, it solidified that offensive line, made it easier for me to do my job, made it easier for Maurice to do his job. And this guy's protected Phil Simms. And trust me, Phil would say to these guys, he says, guys, I need a second more. And the guys said, okay, we can get you that. And trust me, when they did that, we were able to be successful.
Did Eli ever ask for a second more?
I don't think he said anything. When he could have just said, give me a second against San Francisco in 2011, because he didn't even get that.
Chris, the once a Giant, always a Giant means a lot. When you hear that phrase and know it's a Mr. Mara phrase, what is your first recollection or your first feeling that you get? Both of you have these Ring of Honor jackets on, pretty special stuff, but to know that forever, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you'll always be considered family.
I mean, we're sitting here today, and it actually couldn't hold more true as I just started my job over here with the Giants. So my second job. So it's for them to bring me back and give me another opportunity in another field of the game that I want to pursue. It's not like we had been disconnected for 10 years either. I'm always back for games and appearances. But once a Giant, always a Giant carries forward to the community as well, and just kind of the connection with the fans that will always be there. They're thirsty for eras like we had. And I think that's just around the corner. So today's an exciting day for me as I just raced over here from the practice facility, and I hope to be there for many years.
Obviously, Super Bowls are the most memorable moment. You got your 2 rings on. Joe, is there a game that's near and dear to your heart that's not a Super Bowl? Is there one where you just say to yourself, that's a sweet one for me. That's one that I'll always tuck away and think about.
Pittsburgh, 1985. The free safety for them was a guy named Rick Woods. He went to Boise State. Told me before the game, I'm going to lay you out, and Donnie Shell is going to lay you out. I go like this. I says, now, realize you can't tackle me. He goes, what do you mean I can't tackle you? I says, Rick, the whole time we were down at the blue-gray game, you could never tackle me. He goes, Joe, I'm going to lay you out today. And I go, okay, we'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm running the draw. I cut back. There he is in the hole. He tackles my shoe. I'm still running. I run past Donnie Shell and run in the end zone. Get my shoe back, come to the sideline. I said, Rick, I told you. I told you. And he goes, damn, I didn't think you had that kind of ability. I said, you were my roommate? You didn't think you knew that? Some things, Bob.
That's a good one. How about for you, Chris? I mean, is there one game moment?
I think the 2008 Carolina Panther game here, the winner gets the number 1 seed in those playoffs, and we had over 300 yards rushing. You know, it was the overtime win where we ended with that 1st and goal from the 2, and Brandon drives, you know, the whole pile in the end zone for the touchdown. That game was just, honestly, I've probably gone back and watched it maybe 5 to 10 times since I've been retired, just because, and I still get chills just hearing the roars of the stadium on the TV copy. But that was just a great football game, and it meant a lot, and like I said, it gave us a chance to play at home, number 1 seed. We won't talk about what happened that year in the playoffs, but that was a hell of a game, and like to run the ball like we did against that defense, you know, that game was a lot of fun.
See, that's why it's a good thing these guys are together, because they're the same. You did your job so he could do his job. You know what I mean? It's the same. You know, I mean, one thing I have to ask, you had 2 181-yard games in a row in '86, right?
Yes.
Against what, the Cowboys and Washington?
Yes.
Now, did you know in the second one that you had exactly 181? I mean,
Nope.
no. I mean, it was so bizarre. You had 181 exactly in both games.
And Paul, see, here's the funny thing about it. They're back to back.
Yeah.
And you're thinking to yourself, both the same thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it until I looked at it, and somebody said, Joe, you realize you had the same amount of yards? I said, I didn't know anything about that. Just weird, I guess.
I mean, most players don't have 181 in one game in their career, but I'm sure after those games you credited your offensive line.
Yes.
I'm sure you did. That's what you always did. When we would go to you, Chris, and say, you know, you guys ran, and you'd say, well, Tiki had a great game. Brandon had a great game. That was all Ahmad. You know, so it was the same. You guys were saying the same thing, but just reversed. You know, you weren't, you know, I don't know any time that you ever said, Chris, well, we were great today, weren't we? Our offensive line was great. I mean, you know, sometimes when you had a lot of yards, you were proud.
Right.
We didn't give up sacks, but it was Tiki, it was Brandon, it was Ahmad, it was another player. And with you, Joe, it was, well, they just opened the holes for me. You know, I mean, so it's, you know, that's why you guys have rings, you know, because that's the teamwork.
Mutual respect, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Different eras.
Yeah.
All right, so just kind of in bringing this all together here, you got your Ring of Honor jackets on. You both have rings as Super Bowl champions. Now to be considered one of the top 100 greatest players in the history of this storied franchise, as you've reflected upon it, does it make you emotional a little bit?
After I spoke to you the first time, I cried. I told everybody in my family, same thing. I said, you know what? I am one of the greatest Giants ever played. And it was hard not to say that out loud, because, Bob, think about this. Somebody told me I was never going to play college football. I was never going to play in the NFL. Nobody believed me. You're 5'7", you weigh 193 pounds, and they think you can't do this. And I did it. I'm proud of that. And when you told me that, I literally cried, Bob, because that's what I felt at the time, because somebody had told me a long time ago, you're never going to amount to anything. One of my fourth grade teachers told me I was never going to amount to anything. That bothered the hell out of me. But I sent her a nice note after the Super Bowl 21. And I sent her a nice note that says, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Chris?
Well, I told you I got chills when you called me, and my whole family celebrated it. And I think, you know, I'm going to touch on this, just where my number sits, because it's a number that's special with the Coughlin family, is number 31, which I'm sure you guys who have been associated with the J Fund knows that was Jay McGillis' number. So, and that's the number that, you know, we see now, and my wife swears to this day she sees the number 31, she thinks of Judy. So, you know, for me to be number 31 and with the J Fund, and then obviously my late mother-in-law, that's a special number in my family.
Thank you both. Congratulations on the honor. Well deserved, and so happy to have you here to talk about it. Paul, thank you for taking part in this and helping understand the history of the New York Giants. Make sure you stay with us and check out all the Giants social media platforms as we continue our countdown and look back at the top 100 players in the history of the New York Football Giants. For Paul Schwartz, Chris Snee, Joe Morris, and our entire crew, I'm Bob Papa. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Giants Top 100 Players presented by Bud Light.